Valentine's Day is supposed to be about love, but not every story that begins with a card or a message is about romance. Sometimes, it is about attention that stays too long, about being noticed when you never asked to be seen. Tonight, these are 6 true Valentine horror stories, shared by people who learned that love was never the point. I'm not sure why I am finally talking about this now, but tonight feels like the right time. It is quiet, and the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I have shared bits of this story with close friends before, usually late at night when the mood feels heavy, but I always leave things out. This time I want to say it the way it really happened because it still bothers me every time Valentine season comes around. Back then, I was living alone in a small apartment that smelled faintly of old books and cleaning spray. It was nothing special, but it was mine and I felt safe there most of the time. February had just started and stores were already full of red decorations, heart-shaped boxes, and cards promising love that sounded too perfect to be real. I had just gone through a quiet breakup, the kind where nobody yells and nobody fights, but everything still feels empty afterward. I told myself I was fine being alone, and most days I believed it. On the morning of February 10th, I found the first card. It was sitting neatly in front of my door when I came home from work. I remember noticing it because my hallway was usually empty, and seeing something placed so carefully felt strange. The card was red, simple, and sealed in a clean white envelope. There was no name on the front, just a small heart drawn with what looked like a black pen. At first, I assumed it was a wrong delivery or maybe a neighbor playing a harmless joke. I picked it up, unlocked my door, and stepped inside like nothing was wrong. I did not open it right away. I put my keys down, set the card on the kitchen counter, and went to wash my hands. I wish I could say I felt afraid at that moment, but I did not. I felt curious and maybe a little flattered, which now feels embarrassing to admit. When I finally opened the card, the message inside was short but neat. Happy Valentine's. You deserve to be loved. There was no signature, no lipstick mark, no joke. Just that sentence written carefully like someone had taken their time. I stood there reading it again and again, trying to figure out who would leave something like that without saying their name. I checked the envelope again, front and back, but there was nothing else. That night, I placed the card on my bookshelf and tried not to think too much about it. I told myself it was probably someone from the building who noticed I lived alone and wanted to be kind. I went to sleep with the television on low the way I usually did, and for once I slept without dreams. The next day there was another card. This time it was already inside my apartment when I came home. I noticed it the moment I stepped into the living room. It was resting on my coffee table, placed perfectly in the center like part of a display. My first thought was that I must have left it there myself without remembering, but that idea fell apart quickly. The card was different. This one was pink with a small ribbon glued to the front. I stood completely still for a long moment, listening. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. The door was still locked behind me. The windows were closed. Nothing looked disturbed. Still, my chest felt tight and I could not explain why. I picked up the card slowly and opened it. I like watching you smile when you think no one is looking. I remember sitting down on the couch after reading that. My hands felt cold and I suddenly felt very aware of my own breathing. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out weak and unconvincing. I walked through every room, checked the bathroom, checked the closet, and even looked behind the shower curtain like people do in bad movies. Of course, there was no one there. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound felt louder than it should have been. The building settling. Someone walking down the hallway. Pipes knocking softly behind the walls. I kept thinking about that sentence and how personal it felt. I started replaying my daily routine in my head, wondering who could see me and from where. By February 12th, the cards started to feel less like surprises and more like reminders. There was one on my desk when I woke up, leaning against my computer screen. Another one appeared inside my coat pocket while I was at work, which made my stomach drop when I reached in and felt paper instead of fabric. That one simply said, "You forgot this," as if it was completely normal for someone else to touch my things. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe a friend had a key and thought this was funny. I even checked my phone messages expecting some kind of reveal, but there was nothing. On the evening of Valentine's Day, I came home earlier than usual. The hallway lights flickered as I walked toward my door, and I remember thinking how fitting that felt even then. My door was slightly open. Not wide open, just enough that I noticed immediately. My heart started beating faster, but I still pushed it open, telling myself I must have rushed out that morning and forgotten to lock it. Inside, the apartment was decorated. Red paper hearts were taped carefully to the walls. Candles were arranged on the table, unlit but neatly placed. And in the center of the room there was a large card waiting for me. I did not open it right away. I stayed there longer than I'd like to admit, just staring at the room like it might change if I waited. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but the place did not look damaged or rushed. Everything was calm and careful, almost respectful, which somehow made it worse. Whoever did this had time. They were not afraid of being caught. They wanted the room to look nice. I finally stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I locked it, then checked it again, even though I knew that would not undo what had already happened. The air smelled faintly sweet, like the inside of a gift shop. I moved slowly, afraid that if I rushed, I would miss something important. The card on the table was bigger than the others. Thick paper. Dark red. My name was written on the front in neat letters. Seeing my name like that made my chest tighten. Until then, none of the cards had used it. They felt distant, like they could belong to anyone. This one did not. I sat down before opening it because my legs suddenly felt weak. Inside, the message was longer. I know you do not like crowds. I know you pretend not to mind being alone. I know what time you leave and what time you come back. I know your favorite mug and the song you hum when you wash the dishes. Tonight is about us. Please do not be scared. I read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words would change or soften. They did not. My apartment felt smaller after that, like the walls had moved closer while I was reading. I walked to the kitchen and noticed something that made my stomach drop even more. My favorite mug was sitting on the counter, clean and placed neatly on a folded napkin. I had left it in the sink that morning. That was the moment I truly understood that this person had been watching me for a long time. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried another one, then another. No one picked up. I considered calling the police, but I did not know what I would even say. Someone left me cards? Someone cleaned my mug? It all sounded small when I tried to put it into words, even though my hands were shaking. I decided to leave for the night. I packed a small bag quickly, barely thinking, just moving. As I reached the door, I noticed something else that made me stop. My spare key was gone from the hook near the entrance. I stared at the empty space, feeling foolish for never thinking that could be a problem. I stayed at a friend's place that night, barely sleeping. Every sound made me flinch. I kept checking my phone, half expecting messages to appear, but nothing did. In the morning, I told myself I would go back with someone else, get my things, and figure out what to do next. When I returned that afternoon, everything was exactly the way I had left it. Except for one thing. There was a new card on my bed. I did not want to touch it, but I did anyway. My hands felt numb as I opened it. I was worried when you left. I waited. Please do not leave without saying goodbye. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling like the room was watching me. I noticed then how many small details someone would have to know to do all of this. My schedule. My habits. My space. This was not a stranger passing by. This was someone close enough to learn me. That night, I slept with the lights on and a chair pressed against the door. I told myself it would be over soon. Valentine's was done. Surely that meant this strange obsession would end too. I was wrong. The days after Valentine's Day felt heavier instead of calmer, like the air itself was waiting for something. I kept expecting the cards to stop because the date had passed, and whatever strange meaning it held should have passed with it. But the silence that followed felt worse than the notes ever did. It felt intentional, like someone choosing not to speak because they knew that would bother me more. I started changing my routine. I left for work at different times. I stopped humming while doing dishes. I avoided sitting near the windows at night. Every small choice felt like a way to protect myself, even though I knew deep down it probably did not matter. Someone who had gotten this close would not be fooled by small changes. On the fourth day after Valentine's, I found a card taped inside my closet. I only noticed it because I was reaching for a jacket and felt paper brush against my hand. I froze there, arm half raised, staring at the red envelope like it might move. The closet door had been closed. I was certain of that. I opened it slowly the rest of the way and took the card down. I see you trying to hide, it said. You do not have to. That was when fear finally settled into me in a way that did not fade after a few minutes. It stayed in my chest, heavy and constant. I felt watched even when I was alone in the bathroom with the door locked. I started checking behind me while walking outside, scanning reflections in windows, listening for footsteps that matched my pace. I told my building manager about the break-ins. They checked the locks and told me everything looked fine. They suggested maybe I had misplaced my spare key myself. They smiled in a way that said they thought I was stressed, maybe imagining things. I smiled back and nodded because arguing felt pointless. That night, I heard someone in my apartment. It was late, past midnight. I was half asleep when the sound reached me, soft and careful, like someone shifting their weight slowly. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again, closer this time, like a footstep on carpet. I did not move. I did not even reach for my phone. I stayed perfectly still, hoping whoever it was would think I was asleep. The sound stopped outside my bedroom door. I could hear breathing on the other side. Slow. Calm. Familiar in a way I could not explain. I squeezed my eyes shut, every part of me screaming to react, but fear held me in place. After what felt like forever, the breathing moved away. In the morning, there was a card on my nightstand. You look peaceful when you sleep. I did not go to work that day. I packed my things and left the apartment for good by the afternoon. I stayed with different friends, never more than a night or two in one place. I did not tell most of them why. I was tired of seeing disbelief on people's faces. Weeks passed. Then months. No more cards came. Slowly, my body started to relax again. I moved to a new place, changed my number, and avoided anything related to Valentine's Day entirely. I told myself it was over. Last night, while cleaning out an old box, I found something that made my heart drop. A red card. No envelope. Just a message written inside. Distance does not change how I feel. Finding that card felt different from all the others because this time it was not waiting for me in a place someone could sneak into. It was inside a sealed box that had been taped shut since the move, a box I remembered packing myself late at night while telling myself I was finally safe. I sat on the floor staring at it, trying to convince myself that stress can twist memories, that fear can rewrite details, but the tape was cut cleanly, and the card smelled the same faintly sweet way the others had. I did not sleep after that. I kept the lights on and the television playing softly, not because I was watching it, but because silence felt too open, too welcoming. Every small sound made me tense, every shadow felt heavier than it should have been. I started wondering how long this person had been in my life without me noticing, and that thought followed me everywhere. I thought back to small moments that never seemed important before. A stranger holding a door a little too long. Someone standing a bit too close in line. A familiar feeling of being noticed that I always brushed off as my imagination. When you look back with fear guiding your memory, everything starts to connect in ways that feel unfair and overwhelming. The next morning, I checked my phone and saw a notification that made my stomach turn. A message request from an account with no profile picture and no name. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, telling myself I could block it, that I did not have to read anything else, but curiosity and dread have a strange way of working together. The message was short, but it felt heavy. I am glad you kept the card. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My hands were shaking so badly that it took effort to pick it back up. I blocked the account immediately, but that did not bring any relief. Blocking someone does not make them disappear, and I knew that too well by then. For the rest of the day, I felt like I was being followed, even inside crowded places. I caught myself checking reflections, scanning faces, looking for something familiar without knowing what it was. I realized how tired I was, not just physically but emotionally, from carrying fear quietly for so long. That night, I sat by the window of my new apartment and watched the street below. Cars passed. People laughed. Life went on, ordinary and unaware. I wondered how many people around me were carrying stories they never planned to tell, moments that changed the way they see the world forever. I moved again not long after that, further this time, to a place where no one knew me and where I kept my habits deliberately dull and forgettable. I stopped celebrating holidays. I stopped decorating. Valentine's Day became just another date I tried not to notice. But even now, years later, I still feel it every February. That sense of being seen. Of being remembered when I do not want to be. Love is supposed to feel warm and chosen, but what I experienced felt like ownership, like something decided without my consent. I do not know where that person is now. I do not know if they are still watching or if they ever stopped. All I know is that sometimes, late at night, I catch myself listening for breathing that is not my own. I wish I could end this by saying there was a clear moment where it finally stopped, where I knew for sure that whatever followed me had given up. Real life does not work that way. There was no final confrontation. No police knocking on my door with answers. No dramatic ending that made everything make sense. It just faded into something quieter and harder to explain. After the message, nothing else came. No more cards. No new accounts. No strange sounds in the night. Weeks turned into months, and months slowly turned into years. People around me would say that meant it was over, and on the surface I agreed with them. I smiled, nodded, and tried to live like someone who believed they were safe again. But fear leaves marks that do not always show. Even now, I check my locks more than once before bed. I keep my curtains closed at night even when the room feels too dark. I am careful about what I share, about who knows my routines, about how visible I allow myself to be. Love notes and movies make my stomach twist instead of flutter. Valentine's displays still make my chest feel tight, like the air gets heavier just from seeing so much red. Sometimes, when life is quiet and my thoughts start to wander, I replay everything and wonder if the person wanted me to know them or if being unseen was the point. Maybe they felt closer to me that way. Maybe the watching mattered more than being recognized. That idea bothers me more than anything else because it means the story could still be happening somewhere, quietly, without leaving any more evidence. There are nights when I wake up suddenly, heart racing, certain that I heard something. A breath. A shift of weight. The faint sound of paper moving. I lie there perfectly still, listening, counting seconds until my body calms down again. Most of the time there is nothing. Just the normal sounds of a building settling and the distant hum of the city. But every year on Valentine's Day, I find myself checking my front door before going to sleep. So far there has never been another card. I do not know if that means I was forgotten, or if I was simply learned well enough to be left alone. And honestly, I'm not sure which idea scares me more. I never cared much about Valentine's Day, but I also never hated it. To me, it was just another date on the calendar, something you notice only because stores suddenly look louder and brighter than usual. That year, I planned to spend it the same way I always did, quietly, with takeout food and an old movie playing in the background while I pretended not to check my phone too often. I was working the late shift at a small print shop back then. Nothing fancy, just a place that made flyers, posters, and cards for local businesses. February was always busy because of Valentine orders. Red paper everywhere, hearts, roses, the same phrases repeated over and over again. Love forever. Be mine. Yours always. After a while, the words start to feel empty, like decorations instead of real feelings. On February 8th, a man came in just before closing. That alone was not strange. We stayed open late during holiday season, and people rushed in at the last minute all the time. What stood out was how calm he was. No hurry. No apology for coming in late. He wore a dark coat and gloves even though it was not that cold outside. He smiled politely and waited until I finished helping the customer ahead of him. When it was his turn, he slid a piece of paper across the counter. It was folded neatly, like it mattered that the edges lined up. "I would like this printed," he said, his voice soft and careful. I unfolded the paper and felt my stomach tighten just a little. It was a Valentine card design, but not like the others. No bright colors. No cartoon hearts. Just plain white with a simple message typed in the center. For the one who does not know they are loved. I glanced up at him and forced a polite smile, the kind you use when something feels off but not off enough to comment on. "Cardstock or regular paper?" I asked. "Cardstock," he said. "And I will need 6 copies." I typed in the order, trying not to overthink it. People have different tastes. Not every Valentine card needs glitter and pink ink. Still, I felt oddly watched as the printer started its slow hum. The man stood at the counter the entire time, hands folded, eyes following every movement I made. When I handed him the finished cards, he inspected each one carefully as if small details mattered deeply. "These are perfect," he said, then paused. "You work very late." It took me a second to realize he was not making small talk. "Yes," I replied slowly. "Holidays get busy." He nodded like that answered something important. He paid in cash, thanked me again, and left without another word. I locked up soon after and walked to my car, pushing the strange feeling aside. At the time, it felt like one of those moments that stand out briefly, then fade. I wish that had been the end of it. The next few days went by without anything unusual, and I almost forgot about the man and his cards. Work stayed busy, my routine stayed the same, and Valentine orders kept piling up. I told myself that the strange feeling I had that night was just exhaustion mixed with too much sugar from the free candy customers kept leaving on the counter. On February 10th, I came into work and found a small envelope waiting on my station. It was sitting beside the keyboard, placed neatly like it belonged there. My name was written on the front in careful, printed letters. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have, trying to remember if a coworker had mentioned leaving me something. No one said anything when I asked. They all looked just as confused as I felt. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was one of the cards I had printed. For the one who does not know they are loved. My mouth felt dry as I reread the words. There was no note inside, no explanation, no joke written on the back. Just the card. I laughed softly and told myself it was probably a prank. Maybe someone thought it would be funny to mess with me because I worked around Valentine cards all day. Still, I slid it into my bag instead of throwing it away. I do not know why. Something about it felt personal, even though the message was vague enough to mean almost anything. That evening, while I was closing up the shop, the phone rang. We almost never got calls that late. I answered with my usual greeting, expecting a rushed customer asking if we were still open. Instead, there was silence on the line. Not static. Not background noise. Just quiet. "Hello," I said. A breath came through the receiver. Slow. Measured. "I am glad you liked the card," a man said softly. I froze, my hand tightening around the phone. It was the same voice. Calm. Polite. Certain. "I am sorry," I said carefully. "I think you have the wrong number." There was a pause just long enough to make my skin prickle. "No," he replied. "I do not." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time after that, staring at the phone like it might ring again. My heart was beating faster than it should have been, and I felt foolish for letting a single call shake me that much. Anyone could guess a phone number. Anyone could try to scare someone working alone late at night. But when I locked the shop and stepped outside, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the printed Valentine cards was tucked under my windshield wiper. The same plain white design. The same sentence. No envelope this time. I drove home with the radio on loud, telling myself over and over that this was coincidence layered on top of coincidence. Still, when I got inside, I double-checked the locks and left the lights on longer than usual. That night, I dreamed of printers running endlessly, feeding out cards that never stopped, each one carrying words meant for someone who never asked for them. After that night, I stopped telling myself it was nothing. I still tried to act normal, but inside, something had shifted, like a quiet alarm that never fully turned off. I kept the card from my car on the kitchen counter, face down, because throwing it away felt wrong and keeping it visible felt worse. Every time I passed it, I felt like I was being reminded of something I could not quite understand yet. The calls started 2 days later. They always came late, usually when I was getting ready for bed. My phone would ring once, sometimes twice, and stop before I could answer. At first, I thought it was a glitch or spam, but then I noticed a pattern. Every missed call happened on nights when I had worked late. Nights when I stayed at the shop longer than usual. Nights when I felt especially tired and alone. On February 12th, I finally answered. I was sitting on my couch with the television on low, pretending to watch something while my thoughts drifted. When the phone rang, I felt a strange calm settle over me, like part of me already knew who it would be. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I did not mean to scare you," the man said gently. "That was never my intention." I stood up without realizing it, pacing slowly across the room. "Why are you calling me?" I asked. "And how did you get my number?" He took his time before answering, as if choosing his words carefully. "You were kind to me," he said. "You handled my order with care. You did not rush me. That matters more than you think." I felt a wave of unease wash over me, not because of what he said, but because of how certain he sounded. "This is inappropriate," I replied. "Please do not contact me again." There was no anger in his voice, no surprise. "I understand," he said. "But Valentine's is coming. It is important." Before I could respond, the call ended. The next day at work, I tried to stay close to my coworkers. I laughed louder than usual. I made excuses to avoid being alone at the counter. I even asked my manager if I could switch shifts, but they said it was too late to change the schedule. February was already chaotic enough. That afternoon, Another order came in through the online system. 6 Valentine cards. Card stock. Plain white. I stared at the screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. The message was different this time. For the one who finally sees. I canceled the order without printing it, my heart pounding. A few minutes later, the system chimed again. The same order. Same message. Same quantity. I canceled it again. When the third notification appeared, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I printed the cards without looking at them, packed them neatly, and placed them on the pickup shelf. I told myself it was better not to fight it. Better not to draw attention. The man came in just before closing, just like the first time. He smiled when he saw the package, as if everything was going according to plan. "Thank you," he said. I was worried. "You cannot keep doing this," I said quietly. "This is not okay." He tilted his head slightly, studying my face. "You are seeing me now," he replied. "That is all I wanted." As he turned to leave, he added something that made my blood run cold. "I will see you on Valentine's Day." I did not sleep at all after that. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every small sound my apartment made, trying to decide which ones were normal and which ones meant something else. The refrigerator clicked on and off. A car passed outside. Someone upstairs walked across their living room. Each sound felt loaded with meaning, like my body was waiting for proof that I was not imagining things. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I told myself I needed rest, but the truth was that I was afraid of being alone at the shop again. I stayed inside, curtains half closed, phone sitting on the table where I could see it at all times. I kept expecting it to ring, but it stayed quiet, and that silence felt deliberate. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. It was not loud or urgent. Just 3 soft taps, evenly spaced, polite in a way that made my chest tighten. I did not move. I stood in the hallway holding my breath, listening. After a moment, I heard footsteps moving away. When I finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. On the floor in front of my door was a small white envelope. I waited several minutes before opening the door, scanning the hallway in both directions like I expected someone to be hiding just out of sight. I picked up the envelope and locked the door again before opening it. Inside was another card. For the one who is almost ready. My hands were shaking now, and I could no longer pretend this was something I could manage quietly. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, explaining everything in a rush, my voice breaking in places I did not expect. They offered to come over immediately, but I hesitated, afraid of involving someone else, afraid of what might happen if this person realized I was no longer alone. By the time evening came, the sky had turned the dull gray color that always comes before snow. Valentine's Day was tomorrow. That thought sat heavy in my chest all night. I kept replaying his words in my head, the way he said it was important, like it was an event that needed to happen. That night, my phone finally rang. I answered without thinking, my heart already racing. "You should not be alone tonight," he said softly. "It is better if you are prepared." "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I want you to receive what was meant for you," he replied. "Some things cannot be rushed." Before I could say anything else, the call ended. I sat there in the quiet, realizing that whatever this was, it was building towards something, and Valentine's Day was not just a date to him. It was a deadline. Valentine's Day arrived quietly, without the kind of drama you expect from a date that had been hanging over me for so long. There were no alarms, no sudden signs that something terrible was about to happen. The morning light came through my window like it always did, pale and ordinary, and that almost made it worse. It felt wrong that the world could look so normal when I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I could not see. I forced myself to get dressed and leave the apartment. Staying inside felt like waiting to be found, and I could not handle that anymore. I went to a cafe across town, one I had never been to before, and sat near the window with a cup of coffee I barely touched. I watched couples walk by with flowers and small bags, their faces relaxed and happy, and I wondered how many of them felt truly safe in that moment. Around midday, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I did not recognize. "You are doing well," it read. "You are where you should be." I stared at the screen, my fingers numb. I did not reply. I turned the phone face down on the table and tried to focus on my breathing, on the sounds of cups and quiet conversations around me. After a while, I convinced myself to go home. I told myself that hiding in public places forever was not living, and whatever this person wanted would not disappear just because I delayed it. When I reached my apartment, the hallway smelled faintly like flowers. That alone made my heart start racing. My door was closed just the way I had left it, but something felt different. I unlocked it slowly and stepped inside. On the table, arranged with careful precision, were 6 white Valentine cards. Each one was open. Together they formed a sentence. For the one who now understands what it means to be chosen. I felt dizzy reading it, like the words were pulling something out of me that I did not want to face. I backed away slowly, my eyes scanning the room, every shadow suddenly suspicious. That was when I noticed the final card, set slightly apart from the others. This one had my name written inside. "I do not need to be seen anymore," it said. "You will remember me." I called the police after that. I showed them everything. The cards. The calls. The messages. They took it seriously, more seriously than anyone else had, but even then there were no answers. No fingerprints. No cameras that showed anything useful. Just a series of careful actions carried out by someone who did not want to be caught. Nothing else happened after that. No more calls, no more cards, and no more messages. But even now, years later, every Valentine's Day brings back the same feeling, like I am standing in a room where something important already happened, and I am the only one who knows it. I still think about that sentence about being chosen, and how love can be twisted into something that feels more like a claim than a gift. Time has a strange way of smoothing things over without truly erasing them. After the police visit stopped and the phone stayed quiet for long enough, people around me began to relax. Friends would gently suggest that maybe it was all over, that whoever it was had moved on, that I could finally breathe again. I agreed with them out loud because it was easier than explaining why part of me never fully believed that. I changed jobs a few months later. Not because anything happened at the print shop again, but because I could not stand looking at cardstock and red envelopes every day. I found work in a small office where holidays passed quietly and personal details stayed personal. On the surface, my life settled into something calm and predictable. Inside, I stayed alert in ways I never used to be. Every February, I feel it start again. It is subtle at first. A sense of pressure in my chest when I walk past store windows filled with hearts and flowers. A tight feeling in my stomach when I hear people joke about love being everywhere. I tell myself I am fine, that memory can be loud even when danger is gone, but my body never quite believes it. Last year, on Valentine's Day, I came home to find something small but familiar waiting in my mailbox. It was not a card. It was a plain white envelope with nothing written on it. I stood there holding it, my breath slow and careful, feeling like I was back at the print shop counter years ago. I knew I could throw it away unopened. I knew I could leave it there and walk upstairs. But some habits form in fear and never really leave you. Inside was a single sheet of white paper. No hearts. No decorations. Just one sentence typed neatly in the center. You remembered. I sat on the stairs for a long time after that, listening to the sounds of the building, people living their normal lives around me. I realized then that maybe this was never about scaring me into running or forcing me to respond. Maybe it was about leaving a mark, about knowing that someone else's presence had permanently changed the way I moved through the world. I still do not know who he was. I still do not know how much he knew or how close he ever really got. What I do know is that Valentine's Day no longer feels harmless to me. It feels like a reminder that attention can look like kindness at first, and that being noticed is not always the same as being cared for. I have not received anything since. But every year, when February comes back around, I find myself checking my mailbox a little more carefully than I should. I want to be clear from the start that this did not begin in a dramatic way, and that is part of why it stayed with me for so long. There was no immediate fear, no obvious danger, and nothing that would have made me think twice if I heard someone else tell this story. It started in a way that felt normal, almost boring, which is why I ignored my instincts for far too long. At the time, I was volunteering at a community center that organized events for people who lived alone, especially older adults and people who had recently moved to the area. It was mostly harmless stuff like movie nights, shared dinners, and small holiday gatherings. Valentine's Day was coming up, and the coordinator thought it would be nice to set up a card exchange where people could send anonymous notes of kindness to each other. The idea was meant to make people feel less lonely, and on the surface it seemed thoughtful. I signed up to help collect and sort the cards. For the first few days, everything went exactly as expected. People dropped off envelopes at the front desk, usually decorated with hearts, stickers, or handwritten messages that felt warm and harmless. Some were a little sad, some were funny, but none of them stood out in a way that made me uncomfortable. I sat at a long table in the back room, organizing them by pickup number, listening to quiet music and enjoying the calm. Then I noticed one card that felt different. It was not flashy or decorative. It was a simple white envelope with no writing on the outside at all. No name. No number. No indication of who it was for. I assumed someone had forgotten to label it, so I opened it to see if there was anything inside that could help me figure out where it belonged. The message inside was neat and careful. Valentine's Day is when people finally listen. That was all it said. I remember frowning slightly and reading it again, trying to understand what it meant. It was not threatening. It was not romantic. It was just strange in a way I could not immediately explain. I set it aside in a separate pile, planning to ask the coordinator what to do with it later. The next day there were 3 more just like it. Same plain envelope. Same handwriting. Different messages, but all with the same calm, deliberate tone. Some feelings wait a long time to be noticed. Being seen matters more than being loved. Not everyone gets a choice. I did not tell anyone right away. I told myself people express emotions differently, and this was a community event, not a poetry contest. Still, I started feeling uneasy when I realized all of them had been dropped off late in the evening, during the last half hour before closing. By February 12th, there were 7 of them. That night, while locking the back door of the center, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. One of the white envelopes was taped to the inside of my locker, placed carefully at eye level, like someone wanted to be sure I would see it alone. Inside, the message was shorter than the others. You are paying attention now. I stood in front of my locker for a long time after reading that note, trying to decide if I was being dramatic or if something was actually wrong. The hallway was empty, the lights buzzing softly above me, and the building had that hollow sound it always gets after hours. I told myself that someone probably noticed I was sorting the cards and decided to be clever about it. Even then, I could not shake the feeling that the message was not meant for the event anymore. It was meant for me. I took the envelope home that night instead of leaving it behind. I do not know why I did that. Maybe I wanted proof that it existed, or maybe I just did not want to see it again at work the next day. I placed it on my kitchen table and tried to eat dinner like everything was normal, but I kept glancing over at it, half expecting it to move or change when I was not looking directly at it. The next morning, I told the coordinator about the unlabeled cards. I did not show her the locker note right away. I just mentioned that some messages felt a little intense and asked if we should screen them more carefully. She listened politely but did not seem concerned. She reminded me that the exchange was anonymous by design and that people sometimes open up more when they think no one knows who they are. Her tone was calm, reassuring, and completely reasonable, which made me feel slightly foolish for being uneasy. That afternoon, more envelopes appeared. These ones were different. They were still plain white, but now they had numbers written on them, the same pickup numbers assigned to the cards meant for the event. Only these were all assigned to me. My number. The one I used to volunteer and check out supplies. Seeing it written in someone else's handwriting made my chest feel tight, like my space had quietly shrunk. I opened one carefully, keeping my expression neutral in case anyone walked by. I wondered when you would notice they were for you. My heart started beating faster, and I had to take a slow breath before opening the next one. You handle other people's feelings so gently. The third one made my hands shake. Someone should do the same for you. I put all 3 back into my bag and finished my shift without telling anyone else. I smiled when spoken to. I nodded during conversations. On the outside, I was still the same helpful volunteer. Inside, I felt like I had stepped into something I did not understand and could not easily step out of. That night, I dreamed about envelopes filling the rooms of the community center, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling, all waiting to be opened by someone who did not realize they were the intended reader. I woke up with the uneasy feeling that the dream was not really about the building at all. I stopped volunteering the next day, or at least I tried to. I emailed the coordinator early in the morning and told her I needed a break due to personal reasons, keeping the explanation vague and polite. She responded kindly and said I was welcome back anytime, which somehow made it harder. I wanted someone to ask more questions, to notice that something was wrong, but I also felt relief knowing I would not have to step back into that building right away. For a few hours, things felt calmer. I stayed home, cleaned my apartment, and tried to focus on ordinary tasks that required my attention. Folding laundry, washing dishes, answering a few messages from friends. I kept telling myself that distance would make this feel smaller, that without access to the community center, whoever was leaving the notes would lose interest. That belief lasted until early afternoon. There was a knock at my door, light and unhurried, like the person on the other side was confident I would eventually answer. I did not. I stood quietly in the hallway listening. After a moment, I heard footsteps move away. When I finally looked outside, there was a white envelope resting against my doorframe. No stamp and no address. I picked it up with a strange mix of dread and resignation, like part of me already knew what it would say. I locked the door and opened it slowly, standing at the kitchen counter where the light was brighter. "You did not come in today," the message read. "That is okay. I can adjust." The word adjust stayed with me long after I set the paper down. It implied planning, flexibility, awareness of my choices. I tried to think of how someone could know I had stopped volunteering without seeing me there. The thought that someone might have noticed my absence from outside the building, or followed my routine closely enough to expect me, made my skin crawl. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unfamiliar number. "I hope you are taking care of yourself," the message said. "You do so much for others." I blocked the number immediately, but that did not bring relief. It only confirmed what I already feared. This was not confined to the community center anymore. It never really was. I spent that night with the lights on, replaying every interaction from the past few weeks. Every face. Every conversation. I wondered how many times someone had watched me without standing out, how easy it is to blend into spaces where kindness is expected. By the time Valentine's Day arrived, I felt exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. The holiday itself passed quietly, no cards or messages arriving that day, and that silence felt intentional, like a pause before something else. The next morning, I found one final envelope slipped under my door. "You listened," it said. "That matters." I did not open the door right away after finding that envelope. I stood there holding it, feeling the weight of how casually it had been placed, like it belonged there, like my home was simply another location this person felt comfortable visiting. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you feel exposed instead of safe, and I suddenly became very aware of how thin the door felt between me and the hallway. I opened the envelope slowly, even though I already knew what was inside would not bring any comfort. The message was written with the same neat care as the others, each letter evenly spaced, each word chosen like it had been rehearsed. "You listened," it said. "That matters." There was something final about the tone, like a conclusion had been reached without my involvement. I sat down at the kitchen table and placed the note in front of me, staring at it until the words started to blur. My mind kept circling the same questions without landing on answers. Who was this person? How long had they been watching? Why me? I decided then that pretending this would fade on its own was no longer an option. I gathered every envelope and note I had kept, spread them out on the table, and took photos of all of them. Seeing them together made the pattern clearer in a way I had been avoiding. The messages were not random. They followed my actions, my presence, my absence. They reacted to me. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation as calmly as I could, choosing my words carefully because I did not want to sound dramatic or unstable. The officer listened and asked questions, practical ones, about dates and locations and how the messages were delivered. They said someone would follow up, but they also gently suggested that without a clear threat, there was not much they could do immediately. That night I stayed with a friend. I did not tell them everything, just enough to explain why I needed company. I slept on their couch with the television on low, and for the first time in days, my body relaxed slightly. Not because I felt safe, but because I was not alone. The following week passed without incident. No envelopes. No messages. No signs that anyone was paying attention anymore. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, that maybe the person had gotten what they wanted simply by being acknowledged. Another part of me stayed alert, watching for patterns, waiting for the next adjustment. When I finally returned to my apartment to grab more clothes, everything looked normal. Too normal. I walked through each room slowly, checking corners, windows, and the small spaces where things could be hidden. Nothing seemed disturbed. I was almost ready to believe I had imagined the worst of it. Then I noticed my calendar. Valentine's Day had been circled in red pen. The ink looked fresh. I stared at that calendar longer than I probably should have, trying to convince myself there was a simple explanation. I do not use red pen. I barely use my calendar at all anymore, relying on reminders on my phone instead. The circle was neat and deliberate, not rushed, not accidental. It was the kind of mark someone makes when they want to be sure a date will not be forgotten. I checked the rest of the apartment again after that, more carefully this time. I opened drawers I rarely touched. I looked behind furniture. I checked the bathroom cabinet and the space under the bed. Nothing else was out of place, and that somehow made the calendar feel louder, like it was the only thing I was meant to notice. I left the apartment without taking anything and went back to my friend's place. I did not tell them about the calendar. I was tired of explaining, tired of watching concern turn into confusion when there was nothing concrete to point to. Instead, I sat quietly and listened to them talk about normal things, grateful for the distraction. Over the next few days, I tried to live like someone who believed the situation was winding down. I went to work. I answered messages. I even laughed at a joke once and felt almost normal for a few seconds. Still, every time I checked the date, my stomach tightened. Valentine's Day had passed, but the circle suggested it still mattered to someone. The following week, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was not in a white envelope this time. It was a plain brown one, the kind used for official mail, with my address typed neatly on the front. My name was spelled correctly, including the middle initial I rarely used outside of paperwork. That detail alone made my hands shake slightly as I carried it upstairs. Inside was a single page. No greeting. No signature. Some days are not about the date, it read. They are about what the date proves. I sat on the edge of my bed holding the paper, feeling the familiar mix of fear and frustration settle in my chest. The message did not demand anything. It did not threaten. It simply stated something like a reminder that whatever this was did not need to follow the rules I expected. That night, as I was trying to fall asleep, my phone buzzed once with a notification. It was from an unknown number just like before. "You do not need to look for the meaning anymore," the message said. "You already understand." I did not reply. I turned the phone face down and lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet of the apartment, realizing that the scariest part was not the messages themselves. It was how well they seemed to know when I was ready to read them. After that last message, nothing dramatic happened. There was no sudden confrontation, no moment where everything came into focus and made sense. Instead, the silence returned, and this time it felt heavier than before, like something had been carefully set down rather than abandoned. Days passed without envelopes, without messages, without any clear sign that someone was still paying attention, and that uncertainty became its own kind of presence. I moved not long after that, choosing a place in a different part of the city where my routines would be unfamiliar and my name would not mean anything to anyone nearby. I did not tell many people where I was going, and I stopped volunteering altogether. It felt wrong to put myself back into a role where kindness was expected to be open and visible, where someone could observe without being noticed. I hated that thought, but fear has a way of reshaping values when it stays long enough. Life slowly returned to something that looked normal from the outside. I worked. I met friends. I laughed when it felt natural. Still, certain habits never left me. I checked my locks more than once. I look at my calendar closely when new dates appear. I read anonymous messages with a level of attention I never had before, searching for patterns even when there are probably none. Every Valentine's Day since then, I feel the same quiet tension settle in my chest. It is not panic. It is awareness. A reminder that being noticed can feel comforting until it is no longer your choice. I avoid community events. I skip card exchanges. I stay home and keep things simple, telling myself that it is just another day. Last year, on February 14th, there was nothing in my mailbox. No envelope. No note. No message on my phone. I stood there longer than necessary anyway, looking at the empty space, realizing that part of me had expected something to be there. Not because I wanted it, but because the absence itself had become familiar. I went inside and closed the door, listening to the soft click of the lock, and felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Sometimes I wonder if that was the point all along. Not to scare me into running or to force me into contact, but to leave a lasting awareness that attention, once given, does not always disappear when you want it to. It settles quietly into your life, shaping how you move and what you notice. I I did not think anything of it at first, and that is probably the part that bothers me the most now, because looking back, I can see how gently it all started. There was no obvious warning sign, no moment where I should have stopped and said something was wrong, and that is why it settled into my life so easily. It blended in with ordinary days and ordinary habits, and I let it because nothing about it felt dangerous in the beginning. At the time, I was working from home and living in a small rental house on the edge of town. It was quiet there, the kind of place where nights feel longer and sounds travel farther than you expect. I liked that. I had just gotten out of a long relationship, and being alone felt easier than explaining myself to anyone. Valentine's Day was coming up, but I barely noticed until my mother called to remind me, half joking, that I was officially single during the most annoying holiday of the year. A few days later, I found the first voicemail. It was on my old answering machine, the one I kept plugged in out of habit even though most people my age had stopped using them. I noticed the blinking light while making coffee one morning and assumed it was spam or a wrong number. When I pressed play, there was a brief pause, then the sound of someone clearing their throat. No voice followed. Just breathing. It was slow and steady, like someone waiting patiently. After about 10 seconds, the call ended. I stood there listening to the silence that followed, feeling mildly uncomfortable but not alarmed. People but dial numbers all the time. Machines pick up things they should not. I erased the message and went on with my day. The next voicemail came that evening. This one had a voice. "I hope I did not wake you," a man said quietly. His tone was polite, almost careful. "I forgot to say what I meant to say earlier." There was another pause, longer this time. "Valentine's Day makes people honest." The message ended there. I replayed it twice, trying to recognize the voice, but it did not sound familiar. There was no number attached to the call, just a blank space where caller information should have been. I told myself it was probably someone who had the wrong number and thought nothing more of it, even though a small part of me felt unsettled in a way I could not explain. By the end of the week, the voicemails were coming every night. Sometimes they were silent except for breathing. Sometimes the man spoke, always calmly, always like he was continuing a conversation I did not remember starting. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. He never said my name. Still, I started leaving the answering machine unplugged when I went to bed, because I did not like waking up and wondering what might be waiting for me. On February 11th, I came home after running errands and noticed the machine blinking again. I was sure I had unplugged it. The message waiting was longer than the others. "I know you do not enjoy this holiday," the man said gently. "But it is easier to speak when everyone else is distracted." My hands felt cold as I stood there listening. "Please do not ignore me," he added. I have waited a long time to say this out loud. After that message, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with my coffee going cold in front of me, staring at the answering machine like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough. I checked the cord in the outlet, convinced I must have imagined unplugging it the night before, but it was firmly connected, exactly the way I never left it. That bothered me more than the message itself because it suggested someone had touched something inside my house, or that my memory was failing me in a way I did not like to consider. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself with work, but my attention kept drifting back to that calm voice and the way it sounded almost relieved, like speaking was something it had been holding back. I told myself that if the calls continued, I would change my number or report it, but part of me still clung to the idea that this was a mistake that would sort itself out without me having to react. That evening, I unplugged the answering machine again and set it on the kitchen counter where I could see it clearly. I even took a picture of it with my phone, cord detached, just to reassure myself later if I needed proof. When I went to bed, I left the lights on in the hallway, something I had not done since I was a child, and tried to sleep with a book open on my chest, hoping exhaustion would win. Sometime during the night, I woke up to the sound of a click. It was faint, barely noticeable, but distinct enough to pull me out of sleep. I lay there listening, my heart beating a little faster with each second of silence that followed. I told myself it was the house settling or the heater turning on, but I knew that sound too well. It was the sound the answering machine made when it started recording. I stayed in bed until morning, afraid that if I moved, I would hear something else I could not explain. When the sun finally came up, I walked into the kitchen slowly, every sense on edge, and saw the blinking light waiting for me. The cord was plugged back in. My hands were shaking as I pressed play. "I was worried you might stop listening," the man said softly. "That would make things difficult." There was a pause and then a quiet sound like fabric shifting. "You are not in danger," he continued. I would never ruin Valentine's like that. The message ended, leaving the room feeling smaller than before. I stood there realizing that this was no longer something I could dismiss as a wrong number or a harmless mistake. Someone knew my routines. Someone knew when I was home. Someone had been close enough to touch my things without leaving any other trace. That day, I locked every door and window even though it was broad daylight, and I started counting the hours until Valentine's Day without knowing why. From that point on, I stopped pretending this was something that would go away if I ignored it. I spent that morning walking through the house slowly, checking every room in a way I never had before, opening closets, looking under furniture, even checking the attic access even though I already knew it was too small for anyone to fit through easily. Nothing was out of place and there were no signs of forced entry, but that almost made it worse because it meant whoever was doing this did not need to break in at all. I called the phone company and asked if they could trace the calls, explaining as calmly as I could that someone was leaving messages without a number attached. The woman on the line was polite and sympathetic, but she told me there was not much they could do without a caller ID record. She suggested changing my number, which felt like a reasonable solution until I remembered the answering machine being unplugged and plugged back in without my involvement. A new number would not help if the problem was already inside my space. That afternoon, I went out and bought a cheap security camera, the kind meant for indoor use, and set it up in the living room facing the kitchen. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, but the truth was that I needed proof, something concrete to tell myself I was not imagining things. I tested it several times, watching myself move around the room on my phone, feeling strange seeing my own house from that angle. The next voicemail came that night. This time, the answering machine was still unplugged. I was sitting on the couch when I heard the familiar click, followed by the soft whir of the tape starting to turn. My body went rigid before my mind could catch up, and I just sat there listening, my breath shallow and careful. I did not get up. I did not move toward the kitchen. I waited because some instinct told me that standing up would make things worse. The message recorded while I was still in the room. "I like that you are being careful now," the man said quietly. "It shows respect." I could hear something else in the background this time, a faint sound that took me a moment to recognize. It was the same low hum my refrigerator made when it kicked on, which meant the call was coming from inside the house, not through the phone line. My chest tightened as that realization settled in. "Valentine's is almost here," he continued. "I did not want to rush you." When the machine clicked off, the house felt unbearably silent. I grabbed my phone and checked the camera feed immediately, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. The living room looked empty. The kitchen looked empty. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed wrong. But when I checked the recording history, I saw that the camera had gone offline for exactly 2 minutes during the time the voicemail was recorded. I did not stay in the house after that, at least not right away. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my coat, and walked out the front door without even putting on my shoes properly. The cold air outside hit me hard, but it felt better than the heavy stillness inside. I stood in the driveway for a while, trying to slow my breathing, telling myself that panic would only make things harder to think through. I drove aimlessly for a bit, not really sure where I was going, just needing movement. My thoughts kept circling the same questions. How long had someone been coming into my house? How they were getting in? How they knew my habits well enough to time everything so precisely? I checked the camera feed again while parked at a gas station, half expecting to see someone standing in my living room, but the house looked exactly the same as when I left. Eventually, I went back. I do not know why I did, except that running forever did not feel like an option. When I unlocked the door, nothing seemed disturbed. No open drawers. No moved furniture. The answering machine was still unplugged, sitting where I had left it, which somehow felt more unsettling than if it had been touched again. I unplugged the security camera entirely and set it on the counter, suddenly aware that whatever was happening did not follow rules I understood. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the living room with every light on, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, trying to separate normal noises from imagined ones. Every time the heater turned on, my body tensed. Every small creak made my heart jump. I kept thinking about the way the man spoke, how calm he sounded, how confident, like he knew exactly how much fear to apply without pushing too far. Just after midnight, the phone rang. Not the answering machine. The phone itself. I stared at it for several seconds before answering, my hand shaking as I lifted the receiver. "I was wondering when you would come back," the man said gently. "I did not want you to think I had gone." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. There was a soft sound on the line, almost like a quiet smile. "Someone who cares enough to wait," he replied. "Valentine's is tomorrow." I thought it would be nicer if we both acknowledged that. Before I could say anything else, the call ended. I sat there holding the phone, realizing that he knew when I left and he knew when I returned. Whatever control I thought I had was an illusion. Valentine's Day arrived without any dramatic change in the air, and that somehow made it worse. The house looked the same as it always had, quiet and ordinary, like it was unaware of how wrong everything felt inside it. I did not go to bed at all. I sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee I kept forgetting to drink, watching the light slowly change outside the windows as morning came. I kept expecting something obvious to happen, like another call or a knock at the door, but nothing did. Hours passed in an uncomfortable calm, and I started to wonder if the waiting itself was the point. Every time I relaxed even slightly, my thoughts snapped back to that voice, to the way he spoke, like this day meant something specific, something agreed upon even though I had never agreed to anything. Around noon, I finally worked up the nerve to check the answering machine again. It was still unplugged. No blinking light. No sign of activity. I almost laughed from relief, but the sound caught in my throat when I noticed something else instead. There was a single red rose resting on the kitchen counter. It was fresh, the stem still damp, like it had been cut recently. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding, knowing I had not been out of the house long enough for someone to leave it without me noticing. The doors were still locked. The windows were still closed. There was no sign of how it had gotten there, which made it feel less like a gift and more like a message. My phone buzzed a few seconds later. "You found it?" the text said. "I was hoping you would not miss it." I felt a wave of anger rise up under the fear, sharp and sudden. My hands shook as I typed back, asking him to stop, telling him this was not welcome, telling him he was scaring me. The message showed as delivered, but there was no reply. The silence that followed felt intentional, like he wanted my words to hang there unanswered. That afternoon, I packed a bag and left the house again, this time with no plan to return that night. I stayed with a friend across town and finally slept, though it was restless and shallow. When I woke up the next morning, Valentine's Day was already over, and part of me hoped that meant whatever this was would end too. When I went back home later that day, the rose was gone. In its place, sitting neatly where it had been, was a small folded piece of paper. "Thank you for sharing the day with me," it read. "I will remember this." After that, things did not escalate the way you might expect, and I think that is why it still unsettles me when I think about it late at night. There was no final message explaining everything. There was no moment where I felt completely safe again. The call stopped. The answering machine never clicked on by itself again. The house stayed quiet in a way that almost felt deliberate, like someone had decided their part was finished. I sold that answering machine a week later. I did not even unplug it carefully. I pulled the cord out of the wall and dropped it straight into a box, sealing it with tape before I could second-guess myself. I replaced the locks on the house, added motion lights outside, and eventually moved, telling myself that distance would help even if I never understood how close the problem had really been. Life went on because it always does. I started sleeping better, then worse, then better again. I stopped listening for every sound. I let myself forget, at least during the day. But some habits never fully left me. I still notice breathing in quiet rooms. I still flinch when phones ring late at night. I still unplug things before going to bed, even when there is no reason to. Every year when February comes around, I feel it again, that low tension in my chest that I cannot quite explain to anyone else. Valentine's cards in stores make my skin crawl instead of making me smile. Roses feel heavy, like they carry meaning I did not ask for. I tell people I just do not like the holiday and they laugh, assuming it is bitterness or bad memories of a relationship that did not work out. I never correct them. The house I live in now is brighter, closer to neighbors, louder in a way that makes me feel safer. Still, on some nights, when everything is quiet and the air feels too still, I find myself listening for a familiar click, half expecting to hear a calm voice remind me that waiting can be an act of care. So far, it has not happened again. But every Valentine's Day, I make sure nothing in my house can record a message without me knowing, and I stay awake just a little later than usual, just in case someone out there still remembers how patient they were willing to be. I do not usually tell this story out loud, mostly because it sounds too quiet to be scary when you summarize it. Nothing chased me. Nobody screamed. There was no single moment where I knew I was in danger. It unfolded slowly, mixed in with normal days, and by the time I realized something was wrong, it already felt woven into my life in a way I could not easily pull out. That year, I was working the night shift at a small grocery store just off the highway. It was the kind of place people stopped at when they did not want to be seen, or when everything else was closed. Valentine's Day was approaching, which meant an entire aisle full of pink boxes, stuffed animals, and balloons that never quite stayed inflated. I worked register most nights, alone after 10, when the store got quiet enough that you could hear the refrigerators humming. On February 9th, a woman came in a few minutes before closing. She looked ordinary in a way that made her easy to forget at first. Medium height, dark coat, hair pulled back neatly. She smiled politely and walked straight to the Valentine aisle. I watched her from the register while pretending to check something on the screen, mostly because there was nothing else to do. She stood there for a long time. Not browsing and not picking things up. Just standing, looking at the shelves like she was deciding something important. Eventually she chose a single card. No chocolates and no flowers. Just one card. She brought it to the counter and placed it face down. "Is this all?" I asked. "Yes," she said softly. "It is enough." I rang it up, slid it back across the counter, and wished her a good night. She hesitated, her fingers resting on the card. "Do you like Valentine's Day?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. "It is fine," I said. "Just another day at work." She smiled at that like I had said something meaningful, and then she left. I did not think about her again until the next night. When I came in from my shift on February 10th, there was a Valentine card waiting for me on the counter. It was the same design she had bought. Plain. Simple. No glitter. No jokes. My manager shrugged when I asked about it and said maybe a customer left it for the store as a joke. I opened it out of curiosity. Inside, written carefully, were the words, "Some people notice more than they admit." There was no name. I laughed it off at the time, but I took the card home with me anyway, folding it carefully and slipping it into my jacket pocket without really knowing why. I told myself there was nothing strange about keeping the card. People leave notes all the time, and it was not like the message was threatening. Still, I placed it on my kitchen table instead of throwing it away, where it sat beside my keys and wallet like it belonged there. Every time I walked past it, I found myself rereading the sentence, trying to decide what it was supposed to mean, and wondering why it felt more personal the longer I looked at it. The next shift was quiet in the way late shifts usually are, stretched thin and slow. A few regulars came in for snacks and cigarettes, and a couple arguing quietly bought ice cream and flowers without looking at each other. Around midnight, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten just a little. The Valentine aisle looked different. One of the card hooks was empty. It was the exact spot where that plain card had been hanging the night before. I checked the register area and felt a strange jolt of recognition when I saw another card resting beside the receipt printer. Same design. Same muted colors. I did not touch it right away. I waited until the store was empty again, then picked it up and opened it carefully. You work hard when everyone else is sleeping. I felt embarrassed for feeling uneasy. It was probably a coworker messing with me or even my manager trying to be funny. Still, I slipped it into my bag instead of leaving it behind. By the time my shift ended, I had mostly convinced myself I was overthinking it. On February 11th, she came back. I recognized her immediately this time. Same coat. Same neat hair. Same calm way of moving through the store like she already knew where everything was. She did not go to the Valentine aisle. She walked straight to the register and placed a small item on the counter, a pack of gum she did not really seem interested in. "You are working again," she said like she was confirming something. "Yes," I replied carefully. She looked at my name tag and nodded slightly, as if matching a name to a face she already knew. "I hoped so," she said. "Some things are easier to say when it is quiet." I rang up the gum and waited, not sure what else to do. She did not leave right away. Instead, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Did you like the card?" she asked. My mouth felt dry. "Yes," I said because it felt safer than asking how she knew. She smiled again, that same gentle smile that did not quite reach her eyes, and picked up her change. "There will be one more," she said. "Tomorrow matters more." Then she walked out, leaving the automatic doors sliding shut behind her like nothing important had just happened. I spent the entire day of February 12th thinking about what she said, even while pretending to focus on normal things like laundry and making food I barely tasted. The phrase, "tomorrow matters more," kept replaying in my head, not because it sounded threatening, but because it sounded decided, like something had already been planned without my involvement. I told myself that if she came back again, I would ask her directly what she meant, even though I knew deep down that I probably would not. That night, when I arrived at work, the store felt different in a way I could not immediately explain. The lights seemed a little dimmer, the aisles longer, the quiet heavier than usual. I checked in with my manager, who reminded me that Valentine's Day would be busy in the morning and thanked me for covering the late shifts. Nothing about his tone suggested anything unusual had happened. About an hour into my shift, I found the third card. It was not on the counter this time. It was tucked behind the register screen, placed carefully where only someone working there would notice it. My hands felt slightly numb as I opened it, already certain it would be the same style as the others. "You notice patterns," it said. "That is why this works." I stood there for a long moment, staring at the words, feeling a slow sense of unease settle in my chest. This was no longer something that could be passed off as coincidence or a joke. Someone was paying attention to details that required time and patience, and that realization made the store feel less like a workplace and more like a stage I had been standing on without realizing it. The rest of the shift passed without seeing her, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time the automatic doors opened, my body tensed, and every reflection in the freezer doors made me glance twice. When closing time finally came, I felt an unexpected rush of relief, like I had made it through something without fully understanding what I had avoided. As I walked out to my car, I noticed a small white shape tucked under my windshield wiper. Another card. This one did not need to be opened for me to feel my stomach drop, because my name was written on the front in neat, careful letters. I opened it slowly, standing in the cold parking lot with the store lights humming behind me. "Tomorrow is when things feel honest," it read. "I will be here." I sat in my car for a long time before driving home, trying to decide if I was afraid of seeing her again, or afraid of what would happen if I did not. I barely slept that night, and when I did, my dreams felt shallow and unfinished, like my mind refused to settle into rest. I kept thinking about the way she said she would be there, not where or when, just that she would be. The certainty in her voice bothered me more than anger or threat ever could have. It sounded like she believed this was something we were both participating in, whether I agreed or not. Valentine's Day arrived quietly. No snow. No dramatic weather. Just a pale morning and a calendar date that suddenly felt heavier than it should have. I went to work earlier than usual, hoping the daylight and extra people around would make things feel normal again. For a while it almost worked. Customers filled the aisles, last-minute shoppers grabbing flowers and cards with rushed apologies to whoever was waiting for them at home. By the time my shift ended in the late afternoon, I felt exhausted but relieved. I told myself I had made it through the important part of the day, that whatever she meant had probably already passed. I started to relax just a little, enough to feel foolish for how tense I had been. Then my manager asked me to cover the register for a bit after dinner rush. The store thinned out quickly once evening set in. Couples left together. Single shoppers moved faster, eyes down, eager to get home. By 9, the place felt hollow again, that familiar late-night quiet settling back into the walls. I was wiping down the counter when I noticed her reflection in the freezer door behind me. She was standing at the end of the aisle, exactly where she had stood the first night, hands folded in front of her, waiting. I turned slowly. She walked up to the counter without picking up anything this time. No card. No gum. Just herself. Up close, I noticed small details I had missed before, like the faint dark circles under her eyes and the way her smile never quite faded, even when her face was still. "Happy Valentine's Day," she said softly. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She tilted her head slightly, considering me. "Because you see things," she said. "Most people pass through places like this without ever really noticing who is here with them." She reached into her coat and placed the final card on the counter between us. I did not open it right away. I did not need to. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. "You do not have to keep it," she added. "But it felt right to give it to you." She left before I could say anything else, disappearing into the automatic doors and into the night beyond the parking lot lights. I waited until closing time to open the card, my hands unsteady. Inside it read, "Some connections are not meant to last." They are meant to be felt. I have not seen her since. After that night, life did not snap back into place the way I expected it to. There was no clear ending, no moment where I could point and say that was when it stopped being strange. The cards stopped appearing and she never came back to the store, but the feeling she left behind stayed with me in quiet ways that were harder to explain to anyone else. I kept working the night shift for a while, mostly because changing jobs felt like admitting something had actually been wrong. I told myself that if I stayed, if I let the routine return to normal, then whatever meaning I had given to those moments would fade. In some ways it did. The nights blurred together again. The refrigerators hummed. Customers came and went without incident. Still, certain habits never left me. I notice people who stand too still. I pay attention to who watches instead of browses. I read cards more carefully now, especially the ones that try to say something simple but leave too much unsaid. Valentine's Day has become less about romance and more about awareness, about realizing how easily attention can slide into something heavier if you are not careful. Every year around mid-February, I think about her for reasons I cannot fully explain. I wonder where she went and whether she remembers those quiet moments as clearly as I do. Sometimes I catch myself scanning the Valentine aisle out of habit, half expecting to see that plain card hanging there again, waiting to be chosen by someone who notices patterns too. Nothing like that has happened since. But sometimes, late at night, when the store is quiet and the world feels thin, I remember the way she looked at me and spoke like she had already decided what that day meant. And I wonder how many people move through our lives briefly, leaving behind something that feels like a message even when they never say one last word. I was not planning to remember this tonight, but something about the quiet made it come back. It is one of those memories that waits patiently until you are tired and alone, then sits beside you like it has all the time in the world. I have told myself for years that it was nothing, that I misunderstood what was happening, but Valentine's Day always brings it back in pieces I cannot ignore. At the time, I lived in an old apartment building that used to be a hotel decades ago. You could feel it in the layout. Long hallways. Too many doors. Walls that carried sound in strange ways. I rented a small studio on the third floor, nothing fancy, but it was affordable and close to my job. I kept mostly to myself and liked it that way. A week before Valentine's Day, the building manager sent out a notice saying residents could leave Valentine cards for neighbors in a basket by the front desk. It was optional, meant to be friendly, and honestly, I barely paid attention to it. I had no plans to participate. I was tired, busy, and not in the mood for forced cheer. On February 8th, I came home late from work and noticed a red envelope taped to my door. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Wrong door. Wrong floor. That kind of thing happens in buildings like that. The envelope did not have my name on it, just a small heart drawn neatly in the corner. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the distant sounds of elevators and doors opening and closing, before finally taking it inside. I opened it while standing in the kitchen, still wearing my coat. Inside was a simple card. No decorations. No glitter. Just words written carefully in blue ink. I am glad we live so close. That was it. No signature. No apartment number. I laughed softly and shook my head, feeling slightly embarrassed for even pausing. Someone probably meant it as a friendly note. Maybe a neighbor trying to be kind. Still, the wording felt odd, like it assumed something I did not remember agreeing to. I placed the card on the counter and went about my night. The next morning it was gone. I noticed immediately because I am not the kind of person who forgets where they leave things. I checked the trash, the table, even my bag, thinking I might have moved it without realizing. It was nowhere. I told myself it did not matter and headed to work, already pushing the thought aside. That evening there were 2 envelopes taped to my door. Same red color. Same small heart. This time my hands felt cold as I reached for them. I stood in the hallway staring at those 2 envelopes longer than I should have, aware of how quiet the floor felt at that hour. The building always had noise, even late at night, but in that moment it felt muted, like the walls were holding their breath. I peeled the envelopes off the door carefully and went inside, locking the door behind me out of habit rather than fear. At least that is what I told myself. I opened the first one slowly. Inside was another simple card, almost identical to the first, except the message had changed. You noticed me. The second card made my stomach tighten in a way I could not explain. I noticed you first. I sat down at the small table by the window and laid both cards out in front of me, trying to think logically. Someone in the building was playing a game or trying to be clever, or attempting some awkward Valentine gesture without thinking it through. That explanation made sense on the surface, but it did not explain how the first card had disappeared from inside my apartment overnight. I lived alone. I locked my door every night. I knew that for a fact. That night I barely slept. Every sound in the hallway made me tense, every distant footstep felt closer than it should have been. I kept telling myself that fear was making everything feel bigger, that I was letting imagination run ahead of reality, but my body did not seem interested in listening to reason. The next morning, I found the original card sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. Not tossed there. Not out of place. Neatly aligned like it had been intentionally returned. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding, realizing that someone had been inside my apartment again, quietly enough that I had not noticed anything at all. I checked the door. Still locked. The windows. Still closed. Nothing looked disturbed. I did not go to work that day. I called in sick and spent hours pacing my apartment, checking corners, listening for sounds that never came. By late afternoon, exhaustion set in, and with it, a strange sense of resignation. Whoever this was did not seem rushed. They were patient, careful, comfortable. That evening, there was another envelope waiting for me, this one taped lower on the door, closer to eye level. "You do not need to be afraid," it read. "Valentine's is about closeness." I closed the door and slid down against it, sitting on the floor with my back pressed to the wood, realizing that someone else had decided what closeness meant for me without ever asking. By the third day, the cards had stopped feeling like messages and started feeling like updates, as if someone was documenting my reactions and adjusting accordingly. I stopped throwing them away or hiding them because it no longer felt like a choice that mattered. They always came back, sometimes in the same place, sometimes somewhere new, always placed with a level of care that made my skin crawl. I tried staying out late, thinking that if I was not home, there would be nothing to interact with. I went to a cafe, walked around a bookstore, sat on a bench outside even though it was cold. When I finally returned, tired and tense, I found a single envelope waiting on my bed. Not on the door. Not in the hallway. On my bed. I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at it like it might move if I looked away. The room smelled the same as always. Nothing looked disturbed. The envelope was centered on the blanket, aligned carefully with the edge, like someone had taken their time to make it look right. I opened it with shaking hands. "You are more comfortable when you think you are alone." I sat down hard on the floor, my back against the wall, trying to slow my breathing. That sentence felt different from the others. It was not about noticing. It was not about closeness. It was about observation, about understanding patterns I did not realize were visible. I called the building manager that night and told them someone had been entering my apartment. They listened, concerned but skeptical, and promised to change the locks the next day. They suggested maybe I had misplaced my key or left the door unlocked. I did not argue because arguing would not change the fact that I knew what I had seen. The locks were changed the following afternoon. I watched the maintenance worker install them, listened to the solid click when the door closed, and felt a brief wave of relief that almost brought me to tears. I thanked them and sat inside for a long time afterward, convincing myself that whatever this was had finally reached its limit. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in days. When I woke up, there was a red envelope resting on my nightstand. The lock had not been damaged. The card inside was short. "Now we are closer." I screamed then, not loudly but sharply, the kind of sound you make when fear finally stops being quiet. I grabbed my phone and left the apartment without packing anything, walking down 3 flights of stairs barefoot because the elevator felt too slow. I did not go back that night. I stayed with a friend that night, showing up at their door shaken and exhausted, unable to explain everything in a clear order. I told them someone had been getting into my apartment and leaving notes, and that was enough for them to let me in without asking too many questions. I slept on their couch, wrapped in a blanket, waking up every hour with my heart racing even though the apartment was quiet and safe. The next morning, reality started to settle in, heavy and unavoidable. I knew I could not keep pretending this was just a misunderstanding or an awkward neighbor situation. Someone had access to me in a way that did not follow normal rules. Someone was not bothered by locks or time or privacy. That thought stayed with me all day, sitting in the back of my mind no matter what I tried to focus on. I called the police and filed a report, feeling strangely embarrassed as I explained the cards and the way they kept appearing inside my apartment. The officer was polite and took notes, but I could tell there was nothing concrete they could act on yet. No forced entry. No threats written clearly enough to count as danger. Just messages that felt wrong in ways that were hard to explain on paper. That afternoon, I went back to the building with a friend to collect some clothes and important things. I did not want to go alone and I did not want to stay long. The hallway looked the same as always, quiet and unremarkable, which somehow made my chest tighten even more. My door was closed. The new lock was intact. Nothing looked different from the outside. Inside, everything was exactly the way I had left it, except for the wall above my bed. The cards were arranged there, carefully taped in a straight line, every single one I had received so far. They were spaced evenly like a display, like something meant to be looked at all at once. Seeing them together made the pattern impossible to ignore. The messages were not random. They formed a progression. Not a story, but a narrowing, like someone slowly stepping closer while speaking calmly the entire time. My friends swore under their breath and told me to pack faster. I did not argue. I grabbed clothes, documents, anything I could think of, and avoided looking at the wall again. As we were leaving, I noticed one final envelope resting on the kitchen counter, placed where I could not miss it. I did not open it there. I did not want to give whoever did this the satisfaction of imagining me standing alone in that apartment reading their words. I put it in my bag and left without looking back, locking the door even though I knew it probably did not matter. I did not open that last envelope until much later that night, after I was settled on my friend's couch and the apartment around us had gone quiet. I kept it in my bag for hours, feeling its presence like a weight I could not put down yet. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading it, but another part needed to know how this person thought the story should continue, as if understanding their words might give me back some control. When I finally opened it, I did so slowly, smoothing the paper flat on the coffee table as if being careful might somehow protect me. The message inside was longer than the others. "You do not need the space anymore," it read. "You carried it with you. That is how closeness works. Valentine's is not about staying. It is about being remembered." I read it twice, then folded it back up with shaking hands. There was nothing left to misunderstand. This was not about the apartment or the building or even proximity in the way I first assumed. It was about attention that had already been given and could not be taken back, about someone deciding that being noticed once meant being known forever. I did not return to that apartment after that night. I arranged to break the lease early, lost money in the process, and packed the rest of my things with friends during the daytime. The cards on the wall were gone when we came back, every single one removed carefully, leaving behind small squares of cleaner paint where they had been. The emptiness felt intentional, like a stage cleared after a performance ended. Life eventually moved forward in the way it always does. I found a new place, this time in a busier area, and tried to rebuild routines that did not revolve around fear. I stopped participating in building events. I avoided anonymous gestures. I became more private in ways I never needed to be before. Every Valentine's Day since then, I feel a familiar tightness in my chest that I do not talk about. Cards feel heavier now. Notes feel deliberate. Kindness without context makes me pause longer than it should. I have never received another red envelope and no one has ever contacted me again, but I no longer believe that endings always mean distance. Some nights, when everything is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, I remember that final message and realize the scariest part was not being watched. It was being understood without consent. I wish I could say that the fear faded completely after I left that place, but that would not be honest. It changed instead. It became quieter, more thoughtful, like something that learned how to sit still. I stopped jumping at every sound, stopped expecting envelopes on my door, but I never fully returned to the version of myself who believed privacy was something solid and guaranteed. The police followed up a few times, mostly with questions that circled the same answers. No witnesses. No fingerprints that led anywhere. No cameras in the building that caught anything useful. Without a clear suspect or a direct threat, the case slowly lost momentum, until it became one of those things that simply existed in a file somewhere, untouched and unresolved. I moved twice after that, choosing places that felt open and lived in, buildings with noise and neighbors and regular activity. I introduced myself to people. I let myself be known in small, controlled ways, hoping that visibility would somehow protect me. At the same time, I became careful about what I shared, about how much of myself I left unguarded. Valentine's Day has never felt the same since. I still see the decorations and the cards and the heart-shaped promises, but I notice different things now. The way words can feel intimate without permission. The way closeness can be defined by only one person and still have power. I no longer believe that attention is harmless just because it is quiet or polite. Every year, when February comes around, I check my doors and windows a little more carefully than usual. I pay attention to small changes in my space. I tell myself it is just caution, not fear, and most days that feels true. But sometimes, late at night, when the world feels thin and still, I think about those cards lined up on my wall and the calm certainty behind them. I think about how easily someone decided that noticing me once was enough to claim something they never had a right to. Nothing like that has happened again, and I hope it never will. Still, I live with the understanding that closeness does not always announce itself loudly, and that some people mistake observation for connection in ways that can follow you long after the door has been locked behind you.